Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome Wally Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wally.
Hi there, Arnie. I'm glad we managed to connect in spite of the time change that we have right now. I
That's
was a
right.
little confused.
It is. It is. This time of year, of course, is summertime and fall back and leap forwards and all that from around the world. So the clocks change a bit. And I must admit, because I've got another forum and it's at 10:30 at night. So I've got to get an afternoon nap in order to be in reasonable shape to conduct the forum. So it's all over the place, the body clocks. But
Well, I
anyway,
think yeah,
mm,
I think there's a big debate in Canada as to whether or not maybe it should be eliminated.
mm, mm,
And really, it's all something that is oriented around the industrial
mm, mm.
aspect of our lives.
Yeah, it is. I understand that it was originally brought in, at least the arguments in Australia, was to expand the sale hours, expand the shopping hours so that people could do late night
Hmm.
shopping. And
Hmm.
the fact is that people are so indebted that they're down to basics anyway. And at this time of history, what we're doing is we're watching, if you like, a suppression of of the natural order. We're finding a suppression in the sense that the level of debts are so great, the spending power is becoming less and less and less. And I know outside of here we talked about the impoverishment, the homeless people, the street people, the tent cities, and things like that. And to me, that's a reflection of something that's not real in the sense that when I go outside, I still see the sun shining, the wind blowing, the rain is coming, the grasses, the crops are growing, the bounty is there, the industry is there, all the things are there, and yet we have this um, suppression, if you like, in the economic system. And of course, that's part of the subject for today, lifting the veil. Your thoughts, Wally?
Well, that's right, Arnie. We have, I guess you would call it a moral imperative. It has to do with a certain Puritan attitude, which seems to think that morality and ethics and value and worth, the worth of the human being, is somehow expressed in primarily economic functions, which strikes
Mm,
me as an extremely restrictive view in itself.
hmm
I mean, I can well conceive a person who has really never had any involvement in the economy very much as being a very, very fine and exemplary person.
mm,
It is not the fact that you're working in a coal mine that makes you a good, virtuous person. It
mm,
is what you are.
hmm I agree. I think I immediately thought of Mother Teresa, and there it was. There's no productive work that she does, but what wonderful value and contribution to life itself.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you, Wally. That's the most profound thing. And the thing is that if something is produced, nowadays it gets to the point where the robots and automation are doing so much less and less are required in order to produce. So it's an opportunity for mankind, if you like, is to step away from being part of this economic system and move into an area of, if you like, culture, an area of culture, an area of leisure. Your thoughts, Wally?
Well, I don't know if you heard. I just heard that the Japanese apparently have either moved or are going to move to a 3-day weekend.
Okay.
Now, it seems to me that they have, uh, I don't think that they are quite constricted by the Puritan attitude that we have, which seems to come from our particular interpretation of especially the Old Testament.
Mm,
And so they tend to just look at things the way they see them as they are
mm,
more
mm,
without that restricting mental framework.
mm,
And so, I think that we have the native population tends to say, well, we produced and we have enough, and that's okay.
mm.
Whereas we say, well, we produced and we had enough, we have to produce more.
Yeah.
So they tend to be kind of backward because they don't really think to the future as much as we do.
Mm,
But we're kind of malevolent in a way because the way we think about the future is not too helpful.
yeah.
It should be. if we did things correctly. But we seem to have the idea that production, production is just an incidental thing in our lives. It
Mm,
is not, but we seem to think that it is some kind of a thing having moral force.
yeah,
And we don't seem to think about consumption as being the end of production, the
yeah,
logical end and the proper end.
yeah,
Why would you want to produce if you're not going to consume?
yeah,
And yet we have a situation where he was saying we don't have enough money because the system generates costs more rapidly than it distributes incomes.
mm,
So we
mm,
have a restricted economy at the consumption end.
yeah,
And that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean,
no,
the two should balance so that there is a smooth transition and a smooth functioning of the system.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree, Wally. We really are. We're mesmerised by what's going on. I know that our, if you like, our conservative governments in Australia, and they're all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, the reality is that even with China making everything, even with Australia shutting down all its industry, I mean, the latest that are on the block at the moment are the aluminium industries. There's three aluminium industries.
Um,
Power in Australia is so unstable because of this green religion,
yeah,
so unstable that aluminium is looking precarious. Now, we've had our steel industry shut down, our shipbuilding, automotive, engineering, white goods, all of these hugely employable opportunities, self-reliant. And the thing is that our security is just so far out of left field, it's not funny, our security. And yet our governments don't think on these things. They think simply in this realm of, well, we've got to try and balance the budget, and it's just, hang on, the budget was never meant to be balanced. It's not designed to be balanced. It's designed to cause indebtedness. And of course, the world debt, we keep on harping on about it, but the world debt, the Australian debt, the Canadian debt, the American debt, they keep on going through the roof. The debt is demonstrable. It's there every single day, and it's not meant to be in equilibrium. Wally.
well, when you say meant to be, in other words, you're saying it has been planned to be that way.
That's right.
Yeah,
Designed, yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Eric Butler used to refer to the economists as the economic witch doctors,
Hmm,
and he said that financial ignorance was the Achilles heel
hmm.
of the conservative movement. And I certainly agree with that because I
Yeah,
think we're living in a surreal world.
yeah.
I have gone through a surreal experience. My nephew is into that sort of thing, and he took me into his lab and put me into circumstances where I was in a completely surreal world.
Hmm,
And it is absolutely incredible. It's so real you wouldn't believe it, but
hmm,
it's not real.
hmm,
And that is, in a sense, the state that our society, our modern society, is in,
hmm,
because we look at everything through a financial lens.
hmm,
Uh, Arthur Breton, a social credit author of some years ago, wrote a book called The Veil of Finance.
hmm,
And he explained this detachment uh, of our ideas about economics with the realities of economics in a physical sense.
hmm,
And so that we're living in a world that is detached from reality. It's an abstract world.
hmm,
And these ideas have been insinuated into our minds primarily as a means of controlling us.
hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's a mechanism of control, because what it does, it puts us in a position of not realizing the tremendous abundance that we have actually and potentially.
Hmm,
And upon the sudden announcement that there is a financial crisis, suddenly we become incapable of using those things.
yeah.
Our premier of this province, the new premier,
Hmm,
is just off to the ends of the earth trying to find markets for our oil industry, our energy industry, which is in dire straits now,
hmm,
primarily because of the, well, I would say, malice and malevolence of leadership in the East.
hmm.
And but anyway, it's he's off there trying to find these markets, and he has said, "We're broke. There is no money. There is no money. There is no money. We have mines and minerals and energy. We have a highly trained workforce, We
Mm,
have all sorts of forests. And what don't we have in the province of Alberta?
mm-hmm,
If the province of Alberta doesn't have enough to make itself very comfortable,
mm,
then I hate to think what it might be in, like in some other parts of the world.
mm-hmm. Yeah, we,
I mean,
we're
this is madness.
it is madness. That's right, Wally. We have in Australia we have virtually every mineral known to man. I think we're maybe short a bit of chromium or something like that, but
Sure.
generally every single mineral. We have vast resources, natural resources of hydrocarbons, coals. We have a wonderful supply. It's interesting because I was up in the northwest of Australia and I saw these rivers going and just running fresh water out to sea, and it was honestly, it was like filling up Sydney Harbour every week. You could fill up the whole
Oh,
harbour. There was so much fresh water. Now, don't tell me that Australia can't harness all of these natural resources and turn us into the bread bowl of the world. We can,
well, I
but
understand that
as
you and Australia have some kind of policymakers who are actually restricting water supply and causing a lot of problems. Is that right?
exactly right. We're discussing that Murray-Darling Basin
Yes.
Authority, and it is restricting. The government actually shortened the by buying up licenses, and they shortened the available water supply. And since then, of course, the cost of water has gone increased about fivefold. So farmers can't afford it. And even if they could afford it, they still refused it because they're actually allocated a certain amount and no more. It's
Mm.
a it's a deliberate deconstruction of our industry. A deliberate deconstruction. I talked about steel, shipbuilding, automotive, white goods. Aluminium is precarious, and farming, I mean our dairy farmers, this is a deliberate deconstruction of our industry. And it's a, if you like, it's a preparation for poverty. It's a preparation for a time of destitution in Australia, and it's the government that's actually doing it as policy. It's horrendous what's going on, Wally. Horrendous. It really is quite frustrating because it could be a time of plenty, and yet they are actually impoverishing the nation. So many thousand farmers every year leave their farms, and they say get big or get out. And of course, who's buying up the farms? It's overseas interests now. And so we're losing our food security, our power security, our industrial security, and it's policy. This is what is so frustrating. Wally.
Yes, Arnie, it's obvious that you have, if you have poverty, if you have dire conditions, people always run to the government to try and have them alleviate those problems. So, in other words, poverty means increased administration,
Hmm.
increased increased imposition of state policy upon the lives of the people.
Hmm.
And that fits in with this environmental movement.
Hmm.
It really is, again, another form of Puritanism. I think it derives from a desire for power on the part of some people who play very much upon the emotions of other people in order to take advantage of the tendency to be envious or jealous and vindictive.
Mm.
And it's this puritanical attitude is restrictive, and and the whole policy seems to be restrictive. You're using too much. You're abusing the world around you, and that can be done. But I mean, they're they're attacking it in such a way as to bring more and more controls over the people,
Mm.
and it's a very dangerous thing. Um, Basically, Marxism working itself out
Mm.
to more and more control of the people. And of course, to control the people, you have to control the mind.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
The
that's a,
more you control the mind, it makes it a lot easier to control the people than going out there and finding them all and incarcerating them or shooting them or whatever you have to, or beating them or whatever you have to do to them.
hmm.
If you control their mind, that's the battle of half, far more than half done,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
accomplished.
I agree with you, Wally. This Lima Declaration, the deconstruction of our industry, this green policies, the deconstruction of our power,
Mm.
the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. Now, as I understand it, this is an area that the federal government should not even be involved in. In fact, I was reading this morning the history of the Snowy Mountains scheme, and the argument then was that the federal government did not have the constitutional authority to become involved in the waterways. The waterways of the states shall be free. The Constitution's
Hmm.
clear about it. Now, the federal government involvement, the central authority, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, this is to me is a continuation of a similar policy, the Tennessee Valley Authority, where it actually overrode states, overrode individuals
Hmm.
in order to pursue a centralist policy. And what did we get out of that? We got the atomic bomb. We got the hydrogen bomb. This is all that can happen in the end. It's just one of exerting power over people. And to me, we've got to actually, the answer for something like the Murray-Darling Basin Authority is to actually say, no, we need to deconstruct that as a central authority, and we need to revisit water as a right, water as a, if you like, a part of the cultural inheritance, part of the actual community's property. Not
Yes,
something
right.
that
Of
not
course.
something that is should be speculated on or exploited. Because the fact is under Howard, under Menzies, under Chifley, under Ridd, Kevin Rudd, sorry, you just name it. It doesn't make any difference which prime minister is in power, which government is in power, which party is in power. It's all about placing more power into the hands of government or the bureaucrats. And the only way to undo that, to bring it back into even keel, is to actually deconstruct it. Wally.
Well, we had an entirely artificially created Great Depression
Mm,
in the 30s, right? In
hmm
the last century. And that, of course, led to government intervention. And the Tennessee Valley Authority was largely a response to that. It was a big employment project
mm,
and so on. So, I mean, it's just a progression of more and more and more problems created by government. I'm quite sure it would be accurate to say that a lot of our problems with the energy industry in Alberta are consequent to federal meddling.
hmm
It's federal power, centralized power, that has really brought about the ruination of our business.
mm,
And as I say, our premiers are away trying to sell it, drum up markets for it. But the thing of it is, as I said before, it's perfect. We don't want to stop international trade. International trade has advantages. People make things better than we do, or more easily, or more cheaply than we do, and we do the same with other things. If we can exchange them, everybody benefits.
mm,
But that's exchange. And the modern economy is not exchange as such. It is a war to force your goods on other
mm,
nations.
hmm
More of your goods than you get back in terms of real wealth.
hmm
Now, if in trade you part with something and get something of equivalent value in return, that's great. That's wonderful. But if you're trying to force your goods on other nations because you have too much, but of course we don't realize that because we have this veil over our minds that
mm,
makes us convinces us that we're always in a crisis,
mm,
which we are for financial reasons, for abstract reasons,
mm,
because there is no money.
yeah,
Money is simply accountancy. It should
yeah,
reflect what we do. It shouldn't control what we do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
And you
I
see,
sorry, Wally. Keep going.
oh no, that's fine. Go ahead, Arnie.
Well, I just see it that we have the raw materials, we have the
Yeah.
technology, we have the labor force, we have the desire for security. We have all of these things, but the if you like, the veil of finance stops it all. It stops it up, as you say. It stops it all. We're dead in the water because of this veil, because of the veil of finance. Oh, we can't issue any more new credits. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a sec. The First World War was fought and paid for in the execution of the war. We've got a history of the Commonwealth Bank, the story of that under Denison Miller, the then governor. And we had 12 years of credits being issued for infrastructure projects, of which they built East West Railway Line and Board of Works and woolen mills and oil refineries and things like that. You look at China today. China is able to build enormous amounts of infrastructure, enormous amounts of industry, and produce articles, goods, and services for the whole world. China can do that. Now, that's an expression of a financial policy that's issuing new credits to China. And it's got a slave workforce, so it can do whatever it likes. But the fact is that the banking system is there to serve China. The financial system is serving China. The history of, if you like, the development and establishment of America is the same thing. Under greenbacks, the expansion, the rapid expansion, and fighting a war, issuing their own credit in greenbacks. I mean, the history's there, but the fact is that we tend to, I guess it's as you say, the Achilles heel. We won't talk about finance. We won't talk about the banking system. And if we do have a Royal Commission into banking, we define the terms in such a straitjacket that a couple of who really cares gets a bloody nose. But the actual system itself, no one will actually look into it to see that credit creation is a phenomena that the banks have been licensed to do, and they've been licensed for at least 400 years to do it. And the national debt, I read it the other day by William Cobbett in,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
in in one of his books. The national debt is a phenomena of it, and it impoverishes a whole nation. It impoverishes the industry, conniving, manipulative, speculative industry. Instead of being there as a service to provide goods and services, it's all about exploitation and profit. And that seems to be the only criteria. I know that the Roman Church has come out with encyclicals on this, and some of them we've got on our website. Very, very important encyclicals. But the fact is, if those encyclicals don't get read and don't actually pursue a different way of thinking, there is no chance of lifting the veil. And we'll watch the whole world become impoverished simply because it refuses to lift the veil. Wally.
Well, Major Douglas didn't get paid just to talk. He was an engineer,
Mm,
and he got paid to produce results.
mhm,
He had to deal with things. He had to deal with them efficiently, intelligently, and do them. It wasn't just an exercise. It was a part of a discussion. And he said, if we're going to change this, we have to become focused, and we have to act in a focused manner without spreading our resources out so much that they're completely dissipated and nothing breaks through.
mhm.
Because people are inclined to get into all sorts of extenuating conversations and discussions which really start to diverge from the main problem. And if you're doing that, you're not solving the main problem. You've got to get focused.
Mhm.
And when one of our Canadian governors of the Bank of Canada said that people might not like to know that banks actually create money.
Mhm.
And he went further and said, now, if we want to change the way that the banking is done, there's no law saying that we can't do that.
Yeah.
But you see, the problem again, it's a matter of brainwashing, a matter of, well, it's like the witch doctor. You control your victim's mind, and you could literally destroy your victim in many cases.
Mhm.
They have a tremendous power because the mind is a very, very, well, it determines what we are and what we do.
Yeah.
And so it's a veil that we have, whereas money pretends or purports to represent what we are actually doing, but it gives an increasingly diminishing picture of the abundance of what we are doing
Mhm.
and what we can do. And there's only one, it's the thing that is built into the system intrinsically. It's the nature of the system. Every time the system operates to do something better, this negative factor of debt and inflation becomes even worse.
Mhm.
So it's not something you can think away and say, oh, well, tomorrow things will be better or things are going to improve and all that.
Mhm.
It's amazing. You know, they were saying during the time of the Second World War, some economists were actually saying, no, it's not likely to happen because it can't happen because we simply can't afford it. They not only afforded it, I mean, I had people, uncles in the war. I asked, did they ever notice any shortage of supply coming, of armaments and equipment and stuff? And they said, no, they didn't. It seemed to be coming through in quite a adequate flow.
Mm.
And surprise, surprise, the Americans actually came out with a much greater infrastructure than they ever had before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That's
even with
exactly.
the tremendous and obscene waste of the
Mm.
war,
Hmm.
the tendency toward abundance was so great that they came out much wealthier than when they started.
Yeah, that's right. This is something that we don't actually, as you say, Wallace, we need to focus on and look at it in real terms. The execution of the world wars, the standard of living was actually improving during the execution of the wars. I find that absolutely fascinating that here you've got the able-bodied men are over campaigning somewhere else. The women and the young and the old are manning the factories, and some minor advance control was getting implemented. But the fact is that the raw materials were producing goods and services, and trainloads upon trainloads, shipload upon shipload going overseas. But at the same time, the standard of living, the well-being of those
Mhm.
who are at home was actually improving. And that says to me that there is no physical reason why we can't have a time of plenty. There's no physical reason, but it's the abstract. It's actually where you look at the financial system and you say, oh, yes, but the budget isn't balanced. Well, of course it's not balanced. It's not meant to balance. It's designed not to balance. It's designed to have a shortage. And of course, that shortage is reflected in escalating debt. How can you continue to manufacture? How can you continue to produce and have escalating debt? Surely the debt would have been liquidated a long, long time ago, but it never, ever does. It never gets liquidated. Doesn't matter how much you produce, you can never redeem the debt. And that actually brings me to a point. We're at 27 minutes, and I'm going to bring it up, I think, because I think it's important, Wally. In history, the year of Jubilee, but it's also the year of our Lord. As I understand it, the year of our Lord was a time of debt forgiveness. It was where that people, their ancient, if you like, rights, their ownership of the historical properties and things like that were returned back to them, and the debts were redeemed. Um, your thoughts on that, Wally?
Well, it shows you that they must have had a system that produced debts, but at some point, they decided that these debts were not sustainable or desirable, and they would just simply
Hmm.
wipe them out.
Yeah.
There's a problem there. If you wipe out debts that are genuine, where people have actually given up something in order to issue something that was a debt,
Hmm.
that's one thing. But when you have institutions which create money,
Hmm.
that is a totally different situation.
That's right.
I mean, Douglas gave an advisory to Aberhart in Alberta here, who was foundering. His government was not really trained in economics or social credit, and they were having a lot of problems. Anyway, but one of the things you see, conservatives are always saying we must have a balanced budget. They haven't the foggiest notion of what they're talking about. As Douglas said, the way the system works, it means that the issuer of credit actually owns the wealth
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah.
Now, that requires a bit of analysis, but that's what it is. And how do we know? Because we have these enormous debts that are absolutely astronomical debts
Hmm.
that are outstanding. And a debt usually indicates the right to repossess
Yeah.
on failure to pay, right?
Yeah.
In other words, the person who holds the debt fundamentally owns everything,
Yeah.
especially now because you cannot do anything without debt. We are compelled to use debt in order to survive. You can hardly buy a loaf of bread without using your credit card.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I'm exaggerating, but the whole system is just saturated with debt.
Yeah.
And what they do typically is they just pull the rug out from under it,
Hmm.
and then well, those who are not able to withstand the economic onslaught, just too bad. I guess maybe they were irresponsible or they didn't run their affairs properly.
Mm,
That's not the reason at all. I mean, you can run your affairs improperly, but generally speaking, in a recession or a depression, very legitimate enterprises, businesses, and so on go under. And who ends up with them? Well, the issuer of credit, and that's the banks, right?
that's right. The
Ultimately,
banks.
ultimately, because they are the creators of money, so they're the ultimate uh, holders of the debt.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
that's.
this means that they have put an illegitimate lien or they've appropriated the communal capital.
Mm,
But that capital belongs to us, and we should be credited for it, which
that's
we are
right.
not.
Yeah.
And if we're credited for it, we should have credits that are issued without debt in order to allow us to access what we're being produced so we don't have to go into debt at the consumer end.
Mm,
I mean, in a sense, it's ABC, but it's abstract, and the abstract aspect of it is what makes it impossible for people to
reconcile.
immediately recognize the fraud
Yeah.
that the whole thing is.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Lifting the veil. Wally, that's been an excellent discussion today. And I know it's not an easy area where we've gone to lift the veil to actually change your thinking. The Bible talks about renewing your mind. And I'd just like to point out that this month's New Times survey, and I'll put a link on at the bottom of this video. This month's New Times survey is actually dealing specifically with debt redemption and its relationship with the individual and how historically, um, nations have gone through all sorts of convulsions because of the fraudulent financial system, and it
Mm-hmm.
has never been adequately addressed. There's an actual image, I think it dates to 119 BC, I think it is, and it's essentially where these written scripts of debt were being burnt by the Caesar because it was
Oh,
impossible to claim them back. And the thing is that when the financial system goes through this convulsion of if you like complete insolvency of a whole nation, when it does, of course, people revert to subsistence living. In other words, they're only what they can get from the ground, and that's it. There's nothing more. There's virtually no trade or anything going, and it's an unnecessary phenomena. We can work this through, but we have to lift the veil. We actually have to put the energy in to try and rethink this thing and put it in perspective. The financial system is a man-made system. It is meant to serve man, but it does nothing of the sort. It's exploitive, manipulative, and it's designed to impoverish, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Wally Klinck, thank you so much for today. Any closing comments?
well, Arnie, I must say I really find it very rewarding to explore this avenue and these matters. I really do. In a way, it's marvelous to feel that you have a realistic view of them. It is also very disturbing to realize the lack of understanding that seems to exist within the public.
Hmm.
An understanding which I think, misunderstanding, it extends into the academia and to the professional world. But I think there are people who do understand it, but they're using it for the wrong purposes. They're using it to control people. And this environmental movement, as you said, is being used to control people. It's basically a form again of Puritanism and punitive Puritanism. It is saying that we are irresponsible, that we shouldn't be enjoying ourselves so much because we're degrading an already inadequate environment, an environment of essential scarcity.
Mm,
When in fact, if we could take off the veil, we would see absolutely enormous potential. And the potential not just for physical wealth, but the potential for leisure so that we can expand not only our physical surroundings,
hmm.
but can expand our minds and our souls.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And in itself, it's such a beautiful thought. It's a vision that you can implant in someone's mind, Wally. A time of plenty. I know Cobbett spoke about all the festivals, the hundreds of holy days, each year that they had in the 14th
Yes.
century. And here we are, and we're struggling to take the weekend off because we're so pushed for time. Time is such a tyranny because we're on this merry-go-round we're pedaling faster and faster. It's time to lift the veil. Wally Klinck, thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Arnie.
No worries. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.